What? We Gardena and Girdegum, Theod Kinninga, Thringefrunan, Hu Utha Ilthingas, Ellen Fremedon. Oh, sorry. I suppose you probably don't understand Old English unless you're Dr. Philip Chase. Which, if you are Dr. Philip Chase, thank you for watching. Glad you're here. I'd love to hear you read some Beowulf in Old English. That's a language that I'm hopefully going to do better at learning to teach myself to read, translate, recite going forward. But for the rest of you, let's actually go to the translation here by Maria Dahvana Headley, which is what I'm going to be reading for Poetry Thursday today, as well as reviewing. I'm going to do double the work here. So let's see how she starts us off. Bro, tell me we still know how to speak of kings. In the old days, everyone knew what men were. Brave, bold, glory-bound. Only stories now, but I'll sound the Speardane's song, hoarded for hungry times. Their first father was a foundling, shield-chafing. He spent his youth fists up, browbeating every barstool brother, bonfiring his enemies. That man began in the waves, a baby in a basket, but he bootstrapped his way into a kingdom, trading loneliness for luxury. Whether they thought kneeling was necessary or no, everyone from head to tail of the whale road bent down. There's a king. There's his crown. That was a good king. Later, God sent Shield a son, a wolf cub, further proof of manhood. Being God, he knew how the Speardanes had suffered, the misery they'd mangled through, leaderless, long years of loss. So the Life Lord, that almighty big boss, birthed them an earth shaker. Beowulf's name kissed legions of lips by the time he was half grown, but his own father was still breathing. We all know a boy can't daddy until his daddy's dead. A smart son gives gifts to his father's friends in peacetime. When war woos him as war will, he'll need those troops to follow the leader. Privilege is the way of men prime power the world over. That, my friends, is the opening to Beowulf as translated by Maria Dahvana Headley. This is a new translation. This is a very recent translation. This is currently up in one of the categories for the Hugo Awards. But that's not what put it on my radar. No, if you watched my TBR for the month, you know that going into this, I fully expected to loathe this book because its translation process of using modern slang and idioms, and you probably caught some of those in that introduction, as well as it's what I had heard rumored as a very feminist approach to certain aspects of the story. So I went in fully expecting to hate this translation. And it took me a month to get to the end of this translation, although not necessarily the fault of the translation itself. I read it, about 30, 40 pages of it a few weeks ago, and then just hadn't gotten back around to it until today, at which point I finished the rest of the book today. So before I tell you how I felt about this book and spoil my kind of rating of this book, let's talk about some of the things I like about it and some of the things I dislike about it. And then I'm going to read a good chunk of it late in the book, around the time of the appearance of the dragon. If you don't know, the story of Beowulf follows a warrior named Beowulf, and basically has 3 acts where he is dealing with Grendel for the first act, Grendel's mother in the second act, and then a dragon much later in life for the third act of the poem. It is an epic poem. It is one of the oldest works of English literature that we possess, if not the oldest. The actual date of Beowulf is unknown. We don't know who the author was. It could have been a man, it could have been a woman, it could have been a monk. There's a lot of thought that it was probably some kind of a story that had frequently been told, got transcribed down later by a monk who inserted some of the Christian elements into a very pagan feeling story at times. There's a lot that you can really dig into on Beowulf. And if you read enough Beowulf and you immerse yourself into Beowulf enough, you'll start to notice some of those conversations. And one of the biggest scholars to have ever written about, talked about Beowulf was J.R.R. Tolkien. I appreciated Beowulf long before I knew that fact about Tolkien, but the fact that Tolkien himself was huge on Beowulf. In fact, he has a very lengthy essay, The Monsters and the Critics, which is on Beowulf, which is an absolutely wonderful read, and it was a groundbreaking piece of writing when it originally came about. Whether or not it's still wholly relevant today, that remains to be seen. Depends on who you're asking. I seem to believe that it still has quite a bit of merit today. So what I want to do is I want to talk about this translation by Maria Dahvana Headley. Yeah, and so pulling it up on Goodreads, the description here: a new feminist translation of Beowulf by the author of The Mere Wife. And it talks about there's a radical new verse translation of the epic poem by Maria Dahvana Headley, which brings to light elements never before translated into English. So let's talk about what I enjoyed about this, because there are some really good things about this. This poem translation by Headley is very readable. It has good flow. It is poetic and conversational in feel. And that makes it very, very readable. It's a very friendly translation for somebody to pick up and just start reading. And I enjoy that about it. It is my go-to recommendation has always been the Seamus Heaney translation of Beowulf for that same kind of reason. It's readable and poetic. So it has a good flow, it has a good rhythm, it has a good cadence, and it is the perfect launching point for somebody that is new to the story of Beowulf. That's where you would want their first experience to come from. And it's this one, rightfully so, deserves to be in that same conversation. It is very much a reader-friendly translation. Very, very much a reader-friendly translation. What else did I like about this translation? So it's good, it's readable, it's got a good cadence, it's got a good rhythm. It's surprised me as to how poetic it felt, even without being strictly poetry. It has a good cadence to it. I mean, in general, a lot of the lines follow a same kind of rhythm, but you'll have lines that don't necessarily follow that. She doesn't try to keep any of the alliterative verse or anything like that in there, although it does still smatter in. Another thing that I really enjoyed about it is that it kept some of the Kennings from Old English in there. And for those that don't know Old English, if you're not familiar at all with it, a Kenning is where the Old English authors would jam together two words to create some sort of an image, to get something across to the reader. For instance, you heard in the opening there, I believe it was Whale Road, was a Kenning that was in there. And so if you think about it, a whale road, it's a road that a whale travels on. That's the ocean. And so that's a creative way of describing the ocean. You have things like word hoard, and these are jammed together typically in translation with a hyphen between them. So word hoard being the hoard of words that you're using to, translate things, to talk about things. So unlocking your word hoard is to unlock your vocabulary. You're reaching to the depths of what you're able to say to people, and that is a wonderful way of putting things. And I absolutely love Kennings. I wish that they were more prevalent today. And so they give really good and deep and imaginative things. And I expected going into this to have seen the Kennings tossed to the wayside, because she makes it very clear in her introduction to the book what she's setting out to do. And so let's talk about that introduction a little bit. She sets out to do a couple of things, and she goes on for, I think, about 34, 37 pages of introduction, which is a lot. And, most people, if you're picking up a book like this, the common reader, they're going to go, oh, here's where Beowulf actually starts, and start there. And you'd be doing yourself a disservice, especially when you're coming with translated works, because you can learn a lot of what they are trying to do. And at the very least, reading the portion where they talk about the translation process and what their intent is in it can inform you a lot of what you're going to encounter throughout the text. And it really it shapes the experience that the readers get. For instance, a translator could be trying to be faithful word for word translation, which is not this translation. A translator can be trying to keep the poetic rhythms intact, and that is what their top priority is, and so everything else kind of shapes it around keeping that poetic meter, that poetic diction, that alliterative verse, whatever the text happens to be. And those are really good ways of translating, and they provide two radically different experiences, as you might assume based on that. What she is doing here is two-pronged. Her translation choice in terms of verbiage is to try to make it, to use the entire word hoard, to pull a Kenning from thin air here, to use the entire word hoard at her disposal, that in the process of translation. And she justifies this. She's using both older, outdated, archaic words when they're fitting, as well as new, modern idioms, anachronisms, phrases. And so that is her justification. She's not distinctly choosing one over the other. She's employing what she feels is the best word or phrase to fit the message being conveyed by the poet. She believes that if the poem was being written today for the first time, that it would probably go a lot like this. And most translators, I think, would assume that when doing a translation. Well, this is probably what the poet would do. And so I wasn't sure how to feel about it going in, even after that. Yeah, it hadn't really assuaged my nervousness towards this translation. And I found that in the process of reading it, while they are prevalent in there, they are sprinkled all throughout. You have more modern phrases and words popping in there. They weren't overly abundant. They didn't detract most of the time from what was being said. They weren't as jarring as I had expected them to be. So I'll give her a kudos on that little box right there. The other thing she was trying to do was her first encounter with the story of Beowulf was in seeing a picture of Grendel's mother. and had no idea what Beowulf was. And so she had assumed from seeing that picture that's probably the main character of the story. And then she found, a few years later when actually reading Beowulf that, hey, Grendel's mother actually is a kind of a minor figure, so to speak. That isn't the central figure, isn't the key player. And depending on the translation, kind of gets brushed aside, gets written as monstrous and grotesque and um, all sorts of othering types of portrayals. And you certainly can see justification for translating it in either direction. I actually, for one of my classes that I was taking as I was working on my master's degree, took a disabilities in literature class, which I was taking anything literature I could get my hands on. But one of the things we had to write a paper, I was able to choose what book I wanted to write about. And I picked Beowulf, and I talked about the portrayal of Grendel as monstrous and the choice of the translators and how that dictates how the reader gets an image of him having big grotesque claws and being misshapen, and really it could have been the portrayal of a disabled person, somebody who is grotesque and deformed in figure but not necessarily monstrous, and how the choice of a translator really dictates all of that and how the reader experiences it. So I actually could appreciate some of what she was saying that she was going to set out to do. And I found that when reading the section on Grendel's mother, I was expecting it to be riddled with feminist ideology and to be bludgeoning the reader over the head with the portrayal of the perspective of a modern feminist perspective. And that didn't turn out to be true at all. So I was surprised. It was nice. It was nicely done. It was subtle in its handling. It was making, didn't really insert her more as didn't try to make her a bigger figure, but made her a more capable figure, a more lucrative character in the overarching story. It gave her a bigger reputation almost when Beowulf went to go down it and fight her. And I thought it was actually handled quite well. So let's talk what I didn't really like about this. And it's the elephant in the room, of course, is the choice of the translation with the modern words and the modern phrases. And while it's not as prevalent as I had feared, and while it's not always jarring to the reader, it is at times head scratching in the choices of things like hashtag blessed. I mean, really? Hashtag blessed? And she admits that some of these things that she chooses to use probably will fall out of use in a very short span of time. They aren't something that she expects are going to be long-lasting parts of the vocabulary, but because they currently are, and because she's pulling from the entire word hoard that's available to her, she's choosing what fits what she's trying to do. And so at times it's done really well. It's done masterfully. And at other times it's just jarring, and it's the passage that I'll be reading. Maybe I'll make a second video and do one where I'm just reading the lengthy passage I want to do, because this is already getting long. But like it talks about the dragon riding an RSVP in the sky. And it's like, really? I mean, really? Come on. But there are other times where it's done really well, and you almost don't notice. You do notice the obscene number of times that bro gets mentioned. Her choice of translating that first word what as bro, I can tell you what is not appearing every third or fourth stanza in the actual poem. But at the same time, her introduction also tells you that what she envisioned is with this poem is guys sitting around at a bar or at a table and trying to one up each other with storytelling. And you can see that reflected at times throughout here, where, and the use of bro is fitting for that. And let's see if I can get to something that was in there where it has it, and it reminds you a couple of times. Like, here's what I know, Wiglaf, Way of Sun's son. So you have that conversational kind of jumping back to where it reminds you that she's translating it as somebody's telling a story to somebody else. And it works. I mean, I hate to say it, it does work. Sometimes it's jarring, sometimes it's not. When it's done well, it's great. When it's not done well, it just makes me kind of roll my eyes a little bit. The other thing I don't like about this book, so she's got the 30-some pages of introduction. She's even got an acknowledgments page at the back. But what I'm missing are footnotes. There's no footnotes, there's no endnotes, there's nothing in here other than her introduction to give you any kind of context of some of these translation choices or her thoughts on things that are occurring in here. And I think there would be a lot of value while reading this if we'd had some of those, where some of those head-scratching moments that you're like, really, why this? Could have been accompanied by a footnote. I mean, I'm not even asking for tons of them, but give us a couple dozen footnotes along the way on some of these things where it can enrich the understanding, to deepen the understanding of why you're making these decisions. And that's something that the common reader is not going to care about. You're going to read this and you're going to ignore those unless you really are just baffled by something. And in this, you won't be really baffled by things because it's very good storytelling. It is written in an engaging and readable way. And so in that sense, she's very, very successful. So my overall thoughts on this translation. Remember, I planned to hate this book. I was expecting this to be, I'm throwing it away. This is garbage. It's trash. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. Don't read this. It's garbage. And I have to say, I enjoyed it. I liked the translation as a whole. Was it without flaws? By no means. Is it my favorite translation? No. I'm not even 100% certain what my favorite translation would be. Probably Tolkien's. I've got a soft spot for his approach, even though it's not really. I appreciate ones that maintain the poetic structure, so it might even be something that maintains the alliterative verse. But I know it's not Haney, and I know it's not Headley. But I may end up having this be that first one I recommend to somebody that's looking for a good translation of Beowulf to read for the very first time. Because it's very readable. It's enjoyable. It's got good cadence. By and large, it makes good decisions in there for the sake of telling a story as somebody telling the story. You could break it down. You could go line by line. You could dissect the translation decisions. I'm not saying it's an accurate translation. I'm not saying it's a good translation in any shape of academic sense. But it is a good readable translation with a good flow and cadence and a very high readability factor, which makes it highly enjoyable and a great first exposure to the story of Beowulf. So I did enjoy it. Is it a 5-star read? No. It probably is going to land at somewhere between 3.7 to 4 stars. Again, it's not a perfect translation, but I want to do something fun. So I'm on Goodreads, and I'm going to read a 1-star review, and then I'm going to read a 5-star review for this so that you can hear some of the other thoughts that are out there on each of the different spectrums. So I'm going to start with the one-star review. This one-star review is written by Molly Quinn. It was reviewed December 8th, 2020. Translators each have their own aspect of the story that they focus on. For instance, Seamus Heaney focused on the poetic elements of Beowulf. This Beowulf, translated by Maria Headley, is a feminist translation. I support that mission entirely. There are so many aspects of Beowulf that are often overlooked that have to do with gender roles. This translation, however, really fails at delivering much else. There are a couple of real big issues I had with this translation, but the most obvious one is the modern language and lingo that is used. It is possible to update the language while still using timeless language, but Headley does not do this. The text is sprinkled with words like bro, dude, and the most egregious offense, #blessed. I agree. Using language like this makes the poem sound hokey, and in 10 years will ultimately be outdated. Can you imagine if, in the 1970s, there were a Beowulf with words like groovy in it? How cringe would that sound? This is the same. Headley also does some questionable translation choices, even beyond modern language. For instance, if you are more familiar with Beowulf, you may be aware of the fact that the characters in Beowulf are not Christian and do not believe in Christian God. The narrator is actually the only one who mentions biblical references, such as Cain and Abel, God, or anything else Christian. This translation, however, makes everyone Christian, or at least refer to a singular God rather than many gods. I am not sure if this was an attempt at some sort of commentary, or if this was something that was just overlooked, but the fact that it is there is uncertainty about it makes it poorly handled in either way. Overall, art is dead, and all that is left is the rotting corpse of mediocrity. Sound harsh? Yeah, maybe it is a bit, but I really, really hated the fact that the translation included #blessed. Okay. Actually, let's read one more one-star review. I think the next one down is going to be another fun one. This was reviewed by Carol in August 7th of 2021. I was expecting this new translation to be so cool and to really focus on the viewpoint of Grendel's mother. At least the lengthy introduction was totally unnecessary. It made me believe this retelling was going to focus a lot on Grendel's mother. It was just a simple rehashing of the epic poem Beowulf in a way that was weaker than the actual translation I've read by Seamus Heaney. First off, the language was cringy. I think the author was going for a cool vibe to add to the boring Old English, some may say the old version has, but the use of words bro and daddy were just too much for me. Also, on page 21 it says, sashimi of some sea monsters. That part was just so out of place and unnecessary. Also unnecessary, on page 29, #blessed actually had me rethinking the sanity of this author. I think that is a good word to describe a lot of the lines in the poem, unnecessary. And don't get me started on the ending. The fact that the author thought repeating the sentence "he was the man" twice to end this superb epic poem was very disappointing. Overall, my recommendation is to read the regular translation of Beowulf by Seamus Heaney. It's the one I have read and taught in the past. Do not put yourself through numerous cringe-worthy words and moments. So now let's pull up one or two 5-star reviews. Let's see what we've got here. All right, so this is reviewed by, Mikey, Meike, September 17th of 2020. Bro, Maria Dahvana Headley has turned an esteemed classic into a fast, powerful 4D Dolby surround action extravaganza that exudes the joy of storytelling. I've always wanted to read Beowulf, an Old English epic poem from the early Middle Ages consisting of 3,182 alliterative lines that has survived only in the Norwell Codex. Unfortunately, though, I don't understand Old English, and I've also struggled with renditions that try to emulate some of the kind of ancient English, like ones by J.R.R. Tolkien and Seamus Heaney. Now Headley comes along and serves us a fierce, modern version of the text that makes for a riveting read. Beowulf, which probably was intended to mean Beowulf, so bear. The warrior hero of the Geats saves the day when he comes to help the Danish king who has been under attack from Grendel, an unspecified ferocious being and descendant of Cain. Beowulf slays Grendel, and then Grendel's mother, a female warrior who wanted to avenge her son. So Beowulf is #badass, or as he himself explains it in Headley's translation. Yes, I may have bathed in the blood of beasts, netted 5 foul ogres at once, smashed my way into a troll den, and come out swinging, gone skinny dipping in a sleeping sea, and made sashimi of some sea monsters. Anyone who fucks with the Geats, Bro, they have to fuck with me if they're asking for it, and I deal them death. Beowulf travels home, becomes king, and 50 years later slays a dragon and dies. Throughout the whole poem, vigilance, loyalty, and courage are core themes, and it's safe to say that our warrior king isn't particularly woke when it comes to the importance of riches and fame. So much gold. Plus a monument at the shore. Sure, why not? Reading this old text was so much fun, and Headley wrote a fantastic foreword explaining the importance of the text, talking about the feat of translating it and her intention to do right by women in the text. For instance, Aglaïca was often translated as hero when referring to Beowulf, but Grendel's mother, the Aglaïc with, suddenly was a monstrous hell bride, not a warrior wife. A great book. Now I have to read The Mere Wife. All right, let's find one more 5-star review, and then we'll bring this to an end. So this review is by Tamara Aga Jafar, October 21st, 2020. Maria Dahvana Headley's opening salvo in her translation of Beowulf, a new translation, is the word bro. This sets the stage for an irreverent, rollicking, electrifying, and astonishing translation unlike any we have seen before. Headley has studied the poem extensively. Her goal was to render the poem as close to the spirit of its original form as possible. As she says in her extensive introduction, the original reads, at least in some places, like Old English freestyle, and in others like a wedding toast of a drunk uncle's who suddenly remembered a poem he memorized at boarding school. She captures the rollicking spirit of the poem admirably, generating a work that is not so much a translation but a recreation. Her goal was to create a text that is as bubbly and juicy as I think it ought to feel. Headley smashes the set lines of previous translations with flashes of lightning. As she explains in her introduction, some of the Old English words are difficult to pin down in modern English. Just as previous translators have had to interpret and take liberties with the wording, Headley has had to do the same. Whenever possible, she opts for wording that conforms with the original temperament of the poem. For example, the word what, which has been variously translated as listen, heart, lo. She translates as bro. She conceives it as the poet's attempt to capture the audience's attention, as a form of masculinist coded language. She punctuates traditional stately passages of sublime poetry with the occasional 4-letter word and phrases currently inhabiting social media. For example, Wealhtheow admires Beowulf's brass balls. Treasure is now bling. The watchman in Denmark initially confronts Beowulf with, "There's a dress code, you're denied." Headley perceives the narrator as an old-timer at the end of the bar, periodically pounding his glass and demanding another. He shouts to be heard in the mead hall of rowdy men falling over each other in a drunken stupor. He interrupts himself, comments on the action, engages in foreshadowing, and addresses the audience directly to retain attention. She argues his language is laced with satire, as he interrogates definitions of masculinity with its concomitant heroic boasts and chest-thumping. One of the more interesting aspects of Headley's translation lies in her treatment of Grendel's mother. She allows her the simultaneous qualities of a monster while retaining her human qualities as a mother experiencing overwhelming grief at the loss of her only child. With its raucous rhymes, refreshing language pulsating with contemporary idioms, Headley successfully reclaims a 1,000-year-old manuscript for today's audience. She comes out swinging. This is definitely not your father's Beowulf. Very highly recommended for its originality, riotous fun, effusive temperament, and sheer audacity. So, there you have it. Some folks from the Peanut Gallery on both ends of the spectrum. And it's always fun kind of looking at those. And that's, if you like that idea, let me know. And I'll be sure to do that with all of my reviews going forward. Pull 1 or 2 1-star and 5-star reviews to read at the end of my review after I give my own thoughts. Again, this is not my favorite Beowulf. It will never be my favorite Beowulf. But it is not the Beowulf I feared it was going to be. If you're looking for a fast reading and very loose translation interpretation of Beowulf, this is the book for you. If you're looking for a translation of Beowulf that is true to the source material, that provides something that is aligned with what the original poet had in mind, these are not the droids you're looking for. You'll want to pick a different one. However, I did enjoy this. I do plan to purchase a copy for my own shelf. and I do plan to revisit it in the future. So, congratulations to this translator for winning me over to the camp of it's good. It's fun, it's readable, even if it's jarring at times. So I definitely appreciate what she set out to try to do. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy it too for what it is.